The Russian economy under Vladimir Putin, from collapse to resilience. Introduction. When Vladimir Putin first became the president of Russia in the year 2000, the country stood at a fragile crossroads. The 1990s had been a period of turmoil, instability, and economic chaos. The collapse of the Soviet Union left behind a broken economy, declining living standards, and widespread uncertainty. Ordinary Russians often describe that decade as a lost time, when salaries were unpaid for months, inflation eroded savings, and crime filled the vacuum left by weak state institutions. Against this backdrop, Putin presented himself as a leader who could restore stability, pride, and economic growth. Over the following decades, the Russian economy experienced both remarkable recoveries and serious challenges. The story of Russia under Putin is not simply one of growth or decline, but rather a complex journey of transformation shaped by oil wealth, geopolitical conflicts, sanctions, and global economic shifts. Chapter 1. Russia after the Soviet collapse. To understand Putin's economic strategy, it is necessary to first look at the conditions of the 1990s. After the Soviet Union dissolved in 1991, Russia underwent what was called shock therapy, a rapid transition from a planned economy to a market-based system. State-owned enterprises were privatized at lightning speed. Prices were liberalized overnight. The results were dramatic. Inflation skyrocketed, unemployment rose, and millions of Russians fell into poverty. By 1998, Russia faced a severe financial crisis. The ruble collapsed, foreign debt payments were suspended, and many banks went bankrupt. For ordinary Russians, it meant long lines in shops, disappearing savings, and growing despair. Russia, once a global superpower, looked weak and uncertain. This economic disaster shaped the mindset of Russian society. Stability became more valuable than abstract promises of democracy or freedom. When Putin appeared on the national stage in 1999 to 2000, he understood this sentiment. His message was simple: restore order, strengthen the state, and rebuild the economy. And for many Russians, that was exactly what they wanted to hear. Chapter 2. Putin's rise and early economic reforms. Putin came to power during a moment of crisis, but also opportunity. The 1998 financial collapse had already cleared away many unsustainable debts and left room for a rebound. When global oil prices began to rise in the early 2000s, Russia suddenly found itself in a position to benefit. Putin's government focused on a few clear goals. 1. Restoring state control over key sectors of the economy, especially energy and natural resources. 2. Stabilizing finances by paying off debt and building reserves. 3. Reestablishing trust in the state by ensuring salaries and pensions were paid on time. One of Putin's first major reforms was the introduction of a flat income tax of 13% in 2001. This move simplified taxation and boosted compliance. At the same time, the government strengthened its control over the oil and gas sector. The most famous case was the dismantling of Yukos, an oil giant controlled by oligarch Mikhail Khodorkovsky. By bringing energy wealth back under state influence, Putin ensured that revenues from oil exports would fund the government's priorities. These early years built the foundation of what some analysts call the Putin social contract. In exchange for political loyalty and acceptance of limited freedoms, citizens received rising living standards, stability, and national pride. Chapter 3. Oil and gas wealth, the backbone of growth. The 2000s were defined by a boom in global energy prices. Oil prices rose from around $20 per barrel in 2000 to over $140 per barrel in 2008. For Russia, this was a golden era. Export revenues flooded into the state budget, allowing the government to pay off nearly all foreign debt, build massive currency reserves, and create a stabilization fund to prepare for future downturns. The Russian economy grew at an impressive rate of 6 to 8% annually for much of the decade. Moscow became a city of construction cranes, luxury cars, and Western brands. For the first time since the Soviet collapse, millions of Russians joined the consumer class. They bought apartments, cars, and foreign vacations. Shopping malls filled with international brands became symbols of a new era. However, this growth carried a hidden weakness: dependence on oil and gas. More than half of Russia's government revenues came from energy exports. While this created prosperity during boom times, it left the country vulnerable to downturns in global commodity prices. Chapter 4: The Middle Class and Consumer Boom. As incomes rose, a new Russian middle class began to emerge. This group valued stability, consumer goods, and opportunities for their children. Universities expanded, private businesses grew, and Russia felt increasingly connected to the global economy. Between 2000 and 2008, the percentage of Russians living below the poverty line dropped dramatically. Life expectancy increased, and cities modernized. For many ordinary citizens, Putin was the leader who brought dignity and prosperity back to their lives after the chaos of the 1990s. This period also saw a strengthening of the state's role in the economy. While private businesses existed, the largest and most strategic industries, such as energy, defense, and banking, were dominated by state-controlled companies. Critics argued this reduced competition and encouraged corruption. Supporters claimed it ensured national sovereignty and stability. Chapter 5: Global Crises and Sanctions. The global financial crisis of 2008 to 2009 hit Russia hard. Oil prices collapsed, the ruble weakened, and the economy shrank by nearly 8% in 1 year. However, Russia's large currency reserve allowed the government to cushion the blow. By 2010, growth had resumed, though at a slower pace than before. A more serious challenge emerged after 2014, when Russia annexed Crimea. In response, Western nations imposed sanctions on Russian banks, energy firms, and individuals. At the same time, oil prices fell sharply. The combination of sanctions and cheap oil triggered a new recession in 2015 to 2016. Inflation rose, real incomes fell, and many Russians felt the return of economic hardship. Yet the state adapted. The ruble was allowed to float freely, making exports more competitive. Domestic agriculture and industries received support to replace imported goods. While living standards declined compared to the boom years, the economy stabilized and avoided complete collapse. Chapter 6: War in Ukraine and Economic Resilience. The full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022 brought unprecedented sanctions. Western countries froze hundreds of billions of dollars of Russian foreign reserves, restricted technology exports, and cut major banks from the global financial system. Many analysts predicted a total collapse of the Russian economy. But collapse did not happen. Instead, Russia adapted once again. The government increased trade with China, India, and other non-Western partners. Energy exports were redirected from Europe to Asia. Domestic production replaced many imports. The ruble initially plunged, but later stabilized as strict capital controls and high energy revenues supported the currency. Of course, challenges remain severe. Access to advanced technology, especially in sectors like semiconductors and aviation, is limited. Inflation and budget deficits put pressure on households. But the fact that Russia's economy survived at all surprised many observers. Chapter 7: Russia's Pivot to Asia and Future Challenges. One of the biggest shifts under Putin has been Russia's reorientation toward Asia. China has become Russia's largest trading partner, buying oil, gas, and minerals while supplying electronics, cars, and machinery. India has emerged as a major buyer of Russian oil. The Eurasian Economic Union, while limited in size, reflects Russia's desire to build alternatives to Western markets. Looking ahead, Russia faces several long-term challenges. Over-reliance on energy exports. Without diversification, the economy remains vulnerable to global shifts in demand and renewable energy. Demographic decline. Russia's population is shrinking and aging, limiting workforce growth. Technological isolation. Sanctions cut access to innovation and advanced tools, which may slow modernization. Brain drain. Many young professionals and entrepreneurs leave Russia in search of better opportunities abroad. Despite these obstacles, the Russian state has proven resilient. Its ability to adapt, redirect trade, and use its vast natural resources ensures that the economy will not simply vanish under pressure. Conclusion. The story of Russia's economy under Vladimir Putin is one of contradictions. On the one hand, he presided over a remarkable recovery from the chaos of the 1990s, lifting millions out of poverty and restoring national confidence. On the other hand, that prosperity was built on fragile foundations: oil wealth, centralized control, and geopolitical confrontation. Today, Russia remains a country of both strength and vulnerability. Its natural resources give it power, but its dependence on them limits long-term growth. Sanctions have hurt, but not destroyed, the economy. For ordinary Russians, life under Putin has been a mix of rising stability and periodic hardship. In the end, Putin's economic legacy is defined not only by numbers, but by resilience. The Russian economy has endured crises, sanctions, and wars, and while it has not flourished endlessly, it has also refused to collapse. The next chapter of Russia's story will depend on whether it can move beyond oil and adapt to a rapidly changing world.